In January of 2014, the family of a successful entrepreneur named Harold Saska suddenly lost all contact with the head of their household. Investigators gradually uncovered shocking details surrounding Harold's death. The circumstances of the incident turned out to be so horrific and repugnant that questions still arise as to whether the perpetrator's punishment was severe enough. At the same time, it raises the question of whether Harold himself may have had hidden negative character traits that could have led to what happened to him. This crime is so cynical that it even became the basis for writing a book. One of the main figures in this case was 19-year-old Sarah McLinn, a charming and sociable girl. Before the tragedy occurred, she lived with her employer, Harold Saska. Relatives described him as a successful businessman with a difficult personality. He was quite impulsive and always sought to dominate in relationships with anyone. Sometimes Harold could seem rather rude, but according to his loved ones, he by no means deserved the fate that befell him. These events took place in the small city of Lawrence, Kansas, USA, with a population of less than 100,000 people. On January 17, 2014, a young man who lived near the Lawrence College campus came to the local police station. It was a very safe and comfortable area to live in, with a low crime rate. Of course, conflicts sometimes occurred here, but they were usually minor altercations between students that were quickly resolved without serious consequences. When the young man arrived at the police station, the officers initially assumed that it was some insignificant incident. The guy reported that he had heard suspicious and frightening sounds coming from his upstairs neighbor's apartment. He believed that something terrible might have happened there. The law enforcement officers decided to check this information and responded to the call quite promptly. By that time, it was already around 11:00 p.m. No one answered the knocks on the door, but there were strong reasons to believe that something bad had happened inside. The police then began to survey the area. It turned out that the back door was locked. Next, the officers looked through the windows, shining flashlights into the rooms, trying to understand what had occurred inside. In one of the windows, they saw something that turned a routine check into an investigation of a serious crime. The police noticed an unconscious man lying on the floor. When they entered the apartment, they recognized him as Harold. He was lying in a pool of dried blood. Harold's throat was cut so deeply that his head was barely attached to his body. This was clearly not just a crime, but a murder committed with extreme brutality. The local police had never encountered such gruesome crimes before and were shocked by the scene they witnessed and the amount of blood in the apartment. No one could understand who could have committed such a heinous act. Investigators quickly found out that during this period, a 19-year-old student named Sarah McLinn was living with Harold. However, there was no trace of the girl in the house. There was a possibility that she had become the second victim of an unknown psychopath who broke into the apartment and brutally killed the man. Sarah should have been the last person to see Harold alive. What could have happened to the girl was anyone's guess. Numerous witnesses and acquaintances claimed that for Sarah, Harold was a role model and a mentor in life. She saw the best qualities in him: understanding and a desire to help, something she lacked so much from her biological father. The girl had serious problems with her parents at home, who could barely find common ground due to the family breakdown. Sarah moved in with Harold after entering college, and despite the significant age difference, they became friends. On the morning of the same day that the businessman's body was found, Sarah's biological father went to the police and reported her missing. This happened much earlier than when the other student called the police, but the officers never arrived at the scene. Sarah's father reported that he regularly communicated with his daughter by phone, but she had not answered his calls for a day already. This was very unlike Sarah, so her father decided to report the young girl missing. Often the police do not pay attention to such reports or delay the investigation, since teenagers frequently run away from home to have fun or due to family problems, and then return. But this case was clearly different because Sarah could have become the second victim of a brutal crime. Therefore, it was crucial to find the 19-year-old girl as soon as possible and act swiftly. Sarah McLinn was born in 1994 in the city of Topeka, the administrative center of the state of Kansas. She was an ordinary child, cheerful, friendly, and charming. Sarah had an attractive appearance and long dark hair. From a young age, the girl was interested in many things and had a wide range of hobbies. By her parents' decision, she was homeschooled. However, not everything in Sarah's life was cloudless. The girl suffered harassment from a neighbor, which left her with a psychological trauma. Adolescence brought Sarah the typical difficulties of this period. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was a tense atmosphere in the girl's family. When Sarah was 16, her parents decided to divorce. This was followed by conflicts and disputes related to the division of joint property. During that period, Sarah became a victim of violence by a guy she knew. In addition, the neighbor continued to harass her, so the girl was afraid to be at home more than necessary. In an attempt to escape from her problems, Sarah began to drink alcohol and date various guys in search of love. But in the end, nothing helped, and she had a nervous breakdown. Sarah even tried to take her own life, which landed her in the hospital. Sarah underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic. After being discharged, she continued to take prescribed medications. Harold Saska was born in 1961. He always stood out for his extraordinary activity and worked virtually around the clock. The man dreamed of building his own business and getting rich, so he started working at the age of 14, which later yielded results. For a long time, Harold held the position of administrator in restaurants, which allowed him to master management skills and practice, accumulate funds, and gain experience to start his own business. He transformed this invaluable experience into ownership of 3 franchise pizzerias in the cities of Topeka and Lawrence. Harold had been managing the restaurant business long before he met Sarah. Despite being an entrepreneur, Harold remained quite simple in communication. He often participated in various community events and also gave out pizza for free during important church services. He was also a mentor for young people. It was through this program that Harold met Sarah, who started working at one of his restaurants in Topeka. When the girl turned 14, she was already taking orders at the counter. At that time, she was already attracting the attention of the business owner, who constantly complimented her. But Sarah ignored them. By the age of 17, Sarah began saving money to move out from her parents. Sarah realized that she would not be able to become independent and achieve her goals while remaining in the toxic atmosphere of her parents' home. During this period, her mother and father often argued about the upcoming division of property. In any case, the earnings from the restaurant were not enough for Sarah to rent a separate apartment. At this time, she grew closer to her boss and openly told Harold about her life problems. Thanks to the mentoring program, he became like a second father to her. At the same time, Sarah felt that her biological father did not love her. The girl's problems did not leave the restaurant manager indifferent, and Harold offered her to move in with him. Given that Sarah had nowhere to go, but she desperately wanted to solve her problems at home, Sarah agreed to his proposal and after some time decided to move. The only person who expressed concern about this situation was Sarah's mother. They often discussed the upcoming move with her daughter. The woman was suspicious of this idea, suspecting something wrong. But Sarah was adamant. She could no longer stay in her parents' house and endure constant quarrels. Eventually, immediately after entering college, Sarah moved in with her mentor. They both viewed it as a temporary measure and a kind of cohabitation that would not last long. Harold believed that in this way he could help the girl study in college. The man paid for her education and supported her. Several months passed, during which they grew closer and became good friends. Later, they moved together to another house in the suburbs, where the mentorship continued. Until in July of 2014, this cozy house in a quiet residential area became the scene of a brutal murder. The fact that a 19-year-old girl was living with a 52-year-old man as friends already raised many questions. This circumstance surprised the investigators. Initially, the detectives assumed that Sarah could have been the victim of an attack, just like her mentor. Her parents were worried because she did not respond to attempts to contact her. There was a possibility that Sarah had been taken hostage and faced an unenviable fate if the police could not quickly find the perpetrator.
To let her know that we love her and want her to come home.
Forensic experts were shocked by the brutality of the attack on the businessman. It appeared that the motive for the crime was personal. The victim's hands were tied behind his back, and then his throat was slit. Analysis of the blood traces found showed that they all belonged to the deceased. Probably Sarah was not injured during the attack, but then it could indicate her abduction. Other versions were also considered in parallel. During the searches, detectives noticed the disappearance of many valuable items. It resembled a robbery. Most of the items were scattered from the closets, as if the perpetrator was looking for valuables. As a result, the criminal stole money and firearms that Harold kept for self-defense. After taking inventory of the stolen items, the detectives realized that almost all of the girls' personal belongings had disappeared from the house. They were clearly gathered in a hurry. However, Sarah's car remained in place. In addition, her mobile phone and tablet were lying on the kitchen table. Given that Sarah was left without means of communication, investigators increasingly leaned towards the idea of her abduction. Otherwise, she would not have left her phone and car behind. However, the strangest find discovered by law enforcement was letters on the floor. Some word was written in Harold's blood. It was probably a message, but it was smeared, so it was impossible to read the inscription. The only lead the investigators had was the license plate number of the victim's car, which had also disappeared from the crime scene. The number was checked in the database, and the police began an active search for the vehicle. They reviewed all the footage from surveillance cameras where this vehicle could have been recorded. Soon it was spotted on a recording from a toll booth located on the way to Texas. However, the video quality was very poor. The detectives saw a person behind the wheel, but it was impossible to determine who it was. Even the driver's gender remained a mystery. It was clear that the car was heading south, so the police began checking other cameras that could have captured it along this route. However, no new information could be obtained. The sheriff of the precinct contacted all the posts that the stolen car could have passed, but it was quiet everywhere. While the detectives were waiting for new information, they began interviewing the missing girls' friends and acquaintances. The investigators sought to get an idea of these people's personalities and find out the true nature of the relationship between Sarah and the 52-year-old murder victim. The police suspected that their relationship might go beyond ordinary mentorship and friendly cohabitation. However, no evidence of an intimate relationship or anything similar could be found. No one had ever noticed them behaving like a couple in love, although some people had such suspicions. Even in the house where Sarah and Harold lived, the girl had her own separate room and bedroom. It seemed that the man had indeed become a mentor and, to some extent, a father figure to his employee. This was entirely consistent with the image of a virtuous Samaritan, which was portrayed by numerous friends and acquaintances of Harold. The police even found confirmation of this in one of Sarah's social media posts, where she was pictured together with Harold. Sarah referred to him as Dad. Colleagues at work also did not notice any signs of a romantic relationship between the persons involved in the case. They described Harold as energetic and extremely purposeful. The entire business rested on him, and he also enjoyed helping those in need.
He helped everybody. He was to help everybody, and in fact, he was helping Sarah.
Anybody, he would pick you up off the street. If you needed somewhere to stay, he'd give you money. If you were hungry, he was just really kind.
However, some characterized him as a pervert who was attracted to young girls. Therefore, they assumed that the real reason for inviting Sarah to live with him was the desire to engage in an intimate relationship with her. Sarah, for her part, was described as a diligent, nice, and smart girl. She gave the impression of a somewhat shy person. She did not have many close friends. Sarah compensated for most of her communication through activity on social networks. No criminal past was found for either of the pair. Despite interviewing dozens of people, the police did not make any progress in the investigation. Sarah's whereabouts and fate remained unknown. Meanwhile, the critical 48-hour period, during which the chances of finding a crime victim alive were highest, was rapidly running out. Soon, the missing girl's relatives received a call from an unknown person from Texas. He did not say anything specific and simply hung up after a few seconds. Fortunately, the police managed to track the location from which the suspicious call was made. It was assumed that Sarah's kidnapper was the one who called. It was a gas station near the town of Bish, Texas. The call was made from a 24-hour store, so investigators were able to obtain footage from surveillance cameras as soon as they arrived at the scene. The video showed Sarah entering the store and dialing a number on her mobile phone. However, she did not say anything and ended the call a few seconds after her parents answered. Then she calmly made a purchase, paid for gas, got into the car, and drove away. This event raised new suspicions among the police. The girl closely resembled Sarah in appearance. If we assume that she was a victim of abduction, then why did she enter the store alone, without any coercion, and behave completely at ease, as if no one was forcibly holding her? Could it be that Sarah was not a victim but a murderer who was trying to escape? A week passed, during which no news came. Sarah had literally disappeared from all radars, but late in the evening of January 25, 2014, one of the police officers on patrol in the Everglades area of Florida noticed a suspicious car parked on the side of the road while inspecting his precinct.
They say from Lawrence, she then went somewhere into Texas and eventually crossed over into Florida, where she was found Saturday at the Everglades National Park.
Stopping was prohibited in this place, so the officer decided to check the vehicle. In the back seat of the car, he found a girl sleeping, curled up. The patrol officer noticed a large number of empty water bottles in the car. It seemed that Sarah had been here for quite a long time and was actually living in the car. The policeman tapped on the window, waking the girl up. He told her that she must leave this place immediately. After that, as a precautionary measure, the patrol officer checked the car's license plate number in the database. It turned out that the car was wanted and belonged to Harold Saska. The officer ordered the girl to get out of the vehicle, detained her, and sent her to the state of Kansas. The vehicle was immediately seized and sent for examination. During a search inside the car, a large knife with stains resembling blood, a gun, and an axe were found. After conducting analyses, forensic experts concluded that it was this knife that had been used to slit the throat of the 52-year-old businessman. But what could have prompted someone to deal so brutally with a person who was their mentor and in many ways replaced a biological father? In this rather strange tandem, it was Sarah who aroused more suspicion. She came from a troubled family. Despite her good manners and politeness, Sarah had long been considered a difficult teenager. During interrogation at the police station, Sarah confessed that the reason for the tragedy was the events that occurred after she began living with Harold. According to Sarah, at first everything was wonderful. Harold took care of her like a father. The man asked Sarah to call him Dad in public, and he told everyone that Sarah was his stepdaughter so that their cohabitation would not raise unnecessary questions for anyone. But later, the man began to make indecent proposals to the girl and harass her. For some time, Sarah managed to avoid these conversations, but Harold became more and more persistent and aggressive. He no longer just hinted at an intimate relationship, but openly demanded it from the girl. The man began to reproach Sarah for investing a lot in her, and now she was supposedly obliged to sleep with him. To make more of an impression, Harold made a long list of his expenses on the girl and constantly threw it in her face. The list included, in particular, 2 plastic surgeries that the man himself insisted on rhinoplasty and gluteoplasty, designed to correct Sarah's appearance according to his ideas of perfection. Harold also demanded that Sarah undergo breast augmentation surgery, humiliated her by saying that she had a mediocre appearance and no one would ever love her like that. This awakened Sarah's insecurities. Sarah became increasingly constrained and withdrawn. During that period, Harold began giving her alcohol and illegal substances, and when Sarah was high, he coerced her into sexual intimacy. Later, Sarah began to engage in intimate relations with him even without doping, only under his coercion, so as not to anger the man. Due to the constant pressure that Harold exerted on her, Sarah felt like a victim. She was afraid to even go to her parents, feared condemnation, so she continued to endure it all. And Harold continued to threaten her with a lawsuit to recover his expenses. Sometimes Sarah did not go to work because she was ashamed. She would lie on the couch all day, drink, and think about how to break out of this vicious circle. But nothing sensible came to mind. Sarah was morally crushed. She saw the only way out of this situation in killing her abuser, so she eventually went and committed the crime to free herself. On that fateful day, January 14, 2014, Harold returned home and started working on the sound system. He asked Sarah to bring him a beer, and Sarah fulfilled the request. However, she slipped a few sleeping pills into the drink, which she had purchased a few days before the planned massacre. When Harold passed out, Sarah tied his hands to secure herself. Now she had complete control over his body. Sarah described the gruesome details of the crime she committed in an absolutely calm and extremely detailed manner. Having immobilized her victim, Sarah felt for Harold's pulse on his neck, trying to sense how the blood was flowing through his veins. It seemed to give her strength. Sarah went to the kitchen and took a large knife. Sarah plunged the blade into the victim's neck and fell into a frenzy, trying to cut off his head. She literally could not stop. At one point, the thought flashed through the girl's mind to abandon her intention to kill Harold, but she could no longer restrain herself and decided to follow through with it. The police also tried to clarify some strange circumstances found at the crime scene. In particular, they were interested in what was written in blood and why it was later erased. Sarah explained that after the murder, she wrote the word freedom in blood, which then accidentally got smeared. The suspect claimed that she had to break free. That was how she marked the purpose of this crime. Having finished dealing with Harold, Sarah washed up and changed her clothes. She confirmed that she had intentionally left her phone and tablet in the kitchen to avoid the possibility of being tracked. Instead, Sarah stole another mobile phone. It was from this phone that she called her relatives from the gas station. Before fleeing, Sarah gathered her personal belongings, everything that could come in handy on the road. The girl drove as far as she could, then stopped in a deserted place and spent several days there, sleeping in the car, eating fast food, and pondering her next steps. But eventually, Sarah began to be tormented by her conscience. She felt bad and fell into despair. At the time she was found, Sarah was in a pitiful state. During the interrogation, Sarah also admitted that she wanted to see someone die. Law enforcement officers latched onto this phrase and dismissed the version that Sarah herself was a victim of violence.
Well, simply put, we believe that the facts of this case, once they're revealed in the courtroom, will be evidence of that heinous, atrocious, and cruel offense that Kansas legislature has decided is warranted for a crime of this nature, that a higher penalty is appropriate.
Instead, they concluded that they were dealing with a psychopath obsessed with the idea of murder. On January 17, 2015, Sarah McLinn was officially charged with premeditated murder. The hearings took place in the District Court of Lawrence. Numerous people came to the girl's defense, assuring that she had never shown any inclination to violence or cruelty.
Many survivors go to prison because they aren't afforded the same consideration that we see being granted in stand your ground situations.
But the question is, why? And what was going on in that house? And the hearing process that we had really didn't get to that. There are lots of women at TCF in Sarah's situation.
However, the prosecution had a different opinion. A large amount of evidence was collected that literally indisputably pointed to Sarah's guilt. She was found in the victim's car, where a bloody knife with 2 types of DNA was also discovered, the blood of the murdered man on the blade and Sarah's fingerprints on the handle. During the very first interrogation, the girl gave a confession and did not retract it until the start of the court hearings. Given the exceptional brutality of the crime, the prosecutors insisted on life imprisonment for the young defendant. It only remained to convince the jury of this. Sarah's lawyer decided to build the line of defense on the basis of her insanity. He considered such tactics to be the most advantageous, so in court, he insisted that Sarah was mentally ill and needed treatment, not punishment. The defense claimed that the accused had mental disorders, for which she was taking prescription drugs. But approximately a year before the crime, a doctor had prescribed Sarah new medications that had a devastating effect on her mental state. The girl began to have bouts of aggression, she periodically fell into a rage, and cruel thoughts haunted her. All this led to the emergence of Sarah's obsessive idea to kill someone. For a long time, Sarah struggled with this side effect of medications and her illness, hoping that the obsessive thoughts would pass. She was sure that if she did commit murder, she would no longer be able to stop. However, the I'd fix would not let her go. Sometimes it seemed to Sarah that by taking someone's life, she would feel a surge of new strength. This thought inspired the girl. Eventually, she became curious to find out what feelings she would have after killing a person. However, according to the lawyer, the murder was committed in the heat of passion, impulsively. The defendant simply could not cope with the sudden outburst of emotions that seized her. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed that despite her mental problems, Sarah had a clear plan of action for the murder and was fully aware of her actions. To support this version, the fact was presented that Sarah had made online inquiries about injuries to the neck area. She was looking for information on how to inflict knife wounds more effectively and was searching for a victim for her cruel intentions. Shortly before the murder, the businessman had fallen into depression. Harold complained about his depressed state, and even made remarks about wanting to voluntarily end his life. Probably, that's why Sarah chose him as her victim. Perhaps Sarah decided to help her mentor and carry out what he had intended instead of him. Sarah knew exactly how to act, so a few hours before the crime, she took the medications prescribed to her. This was supposed to awaken anger and bloodlust in her. At the same time, she gave Harold a sleeping pill and waited for him to fall into a slumber from which he would never wake up. According to the prosecutor, the planning and preparation for the murder refuted the version of the defendant's insanity, and therefore her place was behind bars. The defense, in turn, had its own arguments. The lawyer insisted that Sarah suffered from multiple personality disorder. She was found to have at least a few alter egos that developed as a result of dissociative identity disorder. This is a mental phenomenon in which a person behaves as if they possess two or more different personalities or ego states. These subpersonalities emerged as a defense mechanism of the psyche in response to the difficult life circumstances in which Sarah found herself as a teenager. In view of this, the lawyer considered Sarah insane and insisted on the need to send her for psychiatric treatment. At the same time, the psychiatrist who worked with her while awaiting the trial said that such deviations could manifest in young people against the background of traumatic events. Sarah fell into the 7% of confirmed diagnoses that are identified during research. It was believed that the first prerequisites for the tragedy appeared back in adolescence, when she was coerced into intimacy through violence. Against this background, new personalities emerged in her. One of them was called Vanessa. Like Sarah, she was very timid and frightened. The diametrically opposite personality was Alice, very cruel and aggressive, always expecting foul play and ready to act to protect all the other alter egos. While communicating with psychiatrists in prison, Sarah made another statement. She spoke about the violence of an intimate nature committed against her by the murdered man. The man had literally arranged her life. He gave her a pretty good salary, a roof over her head, and was indeed a valuable mentor while demanding intimacy. However, Sarah felt trapped because of this. According to her, she got involved with this man to solve her life problems, but instead acquired new ones that she could not cope with. She felt that he was using her. During this period, her personalities began to conflict. Vanessa wanted to commit suicide, but Alice transformed this thought in the exact opposite way. Instead of wanting to kill herself, she wanted to bring death to others. This was what the distorted defense mechanism looked like, associated with the girl's mental deviations, and repeatedly amplified by the new drug prescribed by the doctor. After that, Sarah decided to commit the crime. At this time, Alice, who was killing Harold, gained full control over her body. Having thoroughly enjoyed control over the victim, she slit his throat in the most brutal way. While the execution was taking place, all of Sarah's modest personalities faded into the background, literally becoming outside observers. It is worth noting that many more alter egos coexisted in her than the couple mentioned, but only Alice among them was cruel and truly evil. According to Sarah, her kinder personalities tried to stop Alice, but they failed to do so. In any case, the criminal's lawyer believed that she should not be put in prison. In the defense's opinion, Sarah was insane and desperately needed treatment for her illnesses. The defendant could not even be present at some of the hearings, according to the defense, due to an exacerbation of mental problems. The lawyer was outraged that Sarah had given a confession during the first interrogation. According to psychiatrists, it was unknown which alter ego was in control of the body at that moment. The accused's different personalities gave different testimonies. Only Alice claimed that Harold had harassed her. The rest denied it. In any case, the investigation managed to find evidence of violence by Harold. He wrote about this in messages to Sarah, but it was all ignored. The prosecution concluded its speech by pointing out two indisputable facts. First, Harold was dead. Second, Sarah was definitely the killer. Naturally, she tried to portray herself as a victim, but the real victim was already buried. The defense continued to insist that Sarah suffered from serious mental problems and was also subjected to sexual violence and harassment by the murdered man. After that, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. Sarah arrived at the sentencing in a rather adequate state. She managed to pull herself together. She burst into tears when she saw the Saska family. It seemed that she was ashamed of what had happened, so she asked them for forgiveness. The jury decided that Sarah was guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. The jurors emphasized that it was a planned crime. In May of 2021, Sarah's case was reconsidered. Her sentence was reduced to 25 years. Sarah is still serving her sentence in the Topeka Correctional Facility in Kansas. The earliest date she can be released from prison is 2039. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe.